I was backing out of the driveway just after 8, feeling like my chest was too tight to breathe right, when she stepped onto her porch with a coffee mug in one hand and squinted at the roof box, the spare gas can, the folding chairs tied down in the back, all of it. She said, "You look like you're fleeing the country." I laughed and killed the engine for a second. That's the idea. For months, I'd been working on that van in the evenings and on weekends. New hoses, patched wiring, brakes, fan belt, the tiny sink in the back that barely worked, the little bed platform I built crooked the first time and had to redo. It was old and ugly and stubborn, but it was mine. That trip was supposed to be mine too. No schedule, no boss, no checking in with anybody. Just me, the road, and enough time to stop feeling like I was doing the same week over and over. Rachel leaned on the porch rail and looked at the van like it had personally offended her. "And you really think this thing is making it across half the country? It only has to make it out of town first," I said. She smiled into her coffee. Rachel always looked put together in a way that made me more aware of myself. Even standing there in an old gray t-shirt and loose shorts, hair tied back messy, she somehow looked sharper than anybody heading to work. She was older than me by more than 10 years, divorced, quiet most of the time, and not the kind of person I ever expected to joke around with from my driveway. I shrugged and said, mostly kidding, "Come with me and find out." She didn't even take a second. She just said, "Okay." I stared at her. Okay like okay? Okay like give me 15 minutes. I actually laughed because I thought she was still messing with me. But she set the mug down on the porch rail and went inside. Just turned and disappeared like we'd planned it. I sat there with the engine idling, one hand on the wheel, wondering if I should leave before she came back out and called it a joke. She didn't. 12 minutes later, she came down her steps with a duffel bag, a hoodie tied around her waist, sunglasses on her head, and that same calm face like she was heading out for groceries, not climbing into a van with a guy from next door for a trip neither of us had talked about for more than 30 seconds. I leaned across and pushed the passenger door open. "Rachel, are you serious?" She threw the bag inside. "I'm extremely serious. What about your job? I have vacation days. Your house. It'll still be there." I looked at her for another second. "You really want to do this?" That was when her expression changed a little. Less joking, more honest. She said, "Luke, if I go back inside, I'm going to spend the whole day cleaning a kitchen that is already clean. So yes, I really want to do this." That was enough for me. She climbed in, shut the door, and the whole inside of the van changed immediately. It had smelled like motor oil and canvas and coffee before. Now there was her shampoo in it too, and her bag by her feet, and her knees almost touching the glove box, and suddenly the trip I'd been picturing alone for months didn't feel alone at all. We made it out of town laughing harder than we should have. At the first gas station stop, she came back with Bad Road coffee, sunflower seeds, and 2 greasy breakfast sandwiches she claimed would protect morale. She made fun of my paper map even though she was the one who lost signal 10 minutes later. I caught her opening cabinets in the back while I drove, judging my packing system like she'd been appointed inspector of van life. By noon it felt weirdly normal, like she'd always been there. Then the temperature needle started climbing. At first I told myself it was nothing. Old van, hot day, long incline. But a minute later the needle pushed higher, and then higher again, and Rachel sat up straighter in her seat and said, "Luke, I see it. You definitely see it. Thank you, very helpful." Steam curled out from under the front edge of the hood just as I pulled onto the shoulder. Gravel popped under the tires. The engine gave one ugly shudder when I turned it off, and then everything went quiet except for trucks blasting past us hard enough to shake the van. For a second, neither of us moved. Rachel turned slowly to look at me. "So, great start." I dropped my forehead against the steering wheel and laughed once. Mostly because the other option was swearing until my voice went out. When I climbed down and opened the hood, a wave of heat hit me right in the face. Coolant had sprayed across half the engine bay. I stood there staring at it, hands on my hips, trying not to feel stupid. Months of work. Half a day into the trip. Rachel came around to my side and stood next to me, squinting into the engine like either of us knew enough to fix it by glaring. She said, Tell me the fake good version first. The fake good version is it just got a little excited. And the real version? I let out a breath. Hose clamp, maybe. Maybe worse. She nodded once. Okay, then we deal with that version. That was the first moment it stopped feeling like some loose joke and started feeling real. Hot road, bad luck, no easy fix, her beside me anyway. Cars kept rushing by. The sun kept beating down. Rachel grabbed the water jug from the van without me asking and handed it over, then tore open a pack of crackers and said we were not having a roadside breakdown on empty stomachs. I should have been annoyed, or embarrassed, or wishing I'd left alone like I planned. Instead, I remember looking at her in that heat, hair blowing around her face, smiling like this mess was somehow part of the fun, and thinking the trip had already become something I hadn't seen coming. We were still on that shoulder an hour later, both of us dusty, sweaty, and running on crackers and stubbornness, when I finally got the clamp tightened enough to try again. Rachel held the flashlight for me even though it was full daylight, mostly so she could lean in and say things like, "That looks expensive," and, "You have the face of a man pretending this is under control." "It is under control," I said. She looked at the damp front of my shirt, then at the little puddle under the van. "Sure." But when I started it back up, the engine settled into a decent idle. Not perfect, not pretty, just decent enough to gamble on. I stood there listening to it, waiting for another bad sound. Rachel came around and handed me the last of the water. "So what's the verdict?" I looked up the empty road, then back at the van. "The verdict is we drive like two people who suddenly respect limits." She grinned. "That is not how you drove this morning." By evening, we were nowhere near where I'd planned to stop. The roadside delay had eaten half the day, so I pulled into a cheap campground near a long stretch of pines and a narrow lake that looked a lot nicer in the fading light than it probably was. We got the chairs out, made noodles on the little burner, and for about 20 minutes it felt like the trip had found its shape again. Then the sky changed. Rachel was the one who noticed first. "That doesn't look good." I turned and saw the clouds rolling in low and fast, dark enough to make the water look almost gray. The wind kicked up hard, lifted the paper bowls off the table, and sent one of my napkins straight into the trees. "Great," I said. The first drops were huge. Warm at first, then colder, heavier, and suddenly it wasn't rain so much as a full wall of it. We both lunged for the open bins and bedding at the same time. Rachel grabbed the food crate. I yanked the folding table half closed and nearly smashed my own hand in it. She was laughing while trying to save the coffee tin, which honestly made me laugh too, even though everything was going wrong again. "Why are you laughing?" I shouted. "Because this is awful." The van was too cramped to stay organized once we started throwing things inside. Wet towels, shoes, bags, half-packed food, chairs dripping on the floor, both of us trying to strip off soaked layers without elbowing each other in the face. Rain hammered the roof so hard we had to talk louder just to hear. Rachel sat on the edge of the bed platform with my spare blanket around her shoulders and water still running down one side of her face. "I would like the record to show," she said, "that your glamorous road life is exactly as advertised." I handed her a pair of dry socks. "You could still go home." She looked up at me from under the blanket. "I'm not going home because of weather and bad noodles." That hit me harder than it should have. We barely slept. The air inside the van turned sticky. My back hurt. Rachel stole more than half the blanket and denied it with a straight face. At some point around dawn, the storm finally moved off, leaving everything outside washed out and dripping. We made coffee by the side door in that weird quiet that comes after a rough night, both of us tired enough to stop pretending we looked decent. Rachel took one sip and made a face. "This is terrible." "Then stop drinking it." She took another sip. "No." That became the mood of the next 2 days. Nothing went fully right, but somehow it kept getting better. We missed a turn because I was watching the road and she was telling me about the first apartment she got after the divorce. This tiny place over a laundromat where she could hear every machine through the floor. By the time we realized we'd drifted miles off route, the paved road had turned narrow and rough, and then into one of those back roads that feels like it only exists because nobody bothered to erase it. I should have been annoyed, but the place it led us to was incredible. Not famous. Not marked. Just a high open view above a river bend with nobody else around. We stood there with chips from a gas station and looked out at it like we'd earned something. Rachel bumped my shoulder with hers. See? Your terrible planning works. That was not planning. Still counts. That night we parked near a scrubby little site off the road and ate the last decent food we had left. It was quiet enough that we could hear every small sound outside. Too quiet, maybe. I was packing up the cooler when Rachel froze and pointed past me. There, she whispered. First I saw nothing. Then I caught movement near the edge of the light. Something low and quick nosing around the bag where we'd left the bread. Not huge, but bold enough to make both of us go still. Rachel reached for my arm without thinking, fingers closing around it fast. Don't move, she said, which was funny because she was the one gripping me hard enough to leave marks. I eased forward, made noise, banged the lid against the side of the van. The animal darted off into the brush, taking half a loaf with it. Rachel let out one long breath and then started laughing again, that exhausted kind of laugh where you're half a second from losing it either way. We are terrible at this, she said. We are learning. She was still holding my arm. Neither of us mentioned that right away. When she finally let go, it was slower than it needed to be. We stood there close in the dim light, both tired, both dirty, both smiling like the trip had turned into something private without asking permission. By then, it didn't feel like I had a passenger anymore. It felt like every bad turn and wet night and stupid roadside fix had quietly built us into the same side of things. The first time I really understood how far gone I was happened in a motel parking lot that smelled like wet asphalt and old fryer grease. The weather had turned again that afternoon, and after another hour of pretending we could outrun it, Rachel looked over at me and said, I am done proving I can suffer for the experience. That sounds fair. I want walls. I want a shower. I want a bed that does not fold out of your storage system. I found the first cheap place with a vacancy sign buzzing in the rain. The room was small, the carpet had seen better years, and the air conditioner made a noise like it might quit at any second. But when Rachel stepped into the shower and came out 20 minutes later in an oversized t-shirt with damp hair and no road dust on her anymore, the whole room felt different. Too small, suddenly. We ate vending machine snacks on the bed because the diner next door had already closed. Rachel sat cross-legged near the headboard, picking salt off a bag of chips, and I was on the edge of the mattress pretending I was very interested in the local news playing with no sound. She watched me for a second and said, You've been weird for like an hour. I have not. You absolutely have. I looked over at her. Maybe I'm just tired. She gave me that flat look she used when she knew I was dodging. Luke, that was the problem with being on the road that long. After enough hours together, there was nowhere left to hide. She knew when I was annoyed, when I was worried, when I was pretending something didn't matter. And I knew she knew. So I said the dumb version because it was the only version I could get out. This stopped feeling casual a while ago. Rachel didn't answer right away. She set the chip bag down beside her and looked at me in a way that made my pulse start hammering for no good reason. Then she said quietly, I know. That should have made it easier. Didn't. I laughed once and rubbed a hand over the back of my neck. Okay, good. That somehow makes me more nervous. That got a real smile out of her. She shifted closer, not all at once, just enough that our knees touched. You think I got into your van because I wanted better scenery? I thought maybe you were having some kind of breakdown. I was, she said. You were just there at the right moment. There was a pause after that. Not awkward exactly, just loaded. Then she added, and somewhere between the overheating engine, the storm, getting lost, and almost losing our food to wildlife, I started forgetting what my normal life even felt like. I turned toward her more fully. Is that good? It is when normal felt like being half asleep. That landed deeper than any dramatic speech could have. Rachel never talked like she was trying to impress anybody. When she finally said something honest, it stayed with you. She told me then, more openly than she had before, how bad the last few years had been without looking dramatic from the outside. Work, home, errands, the same quiet evenings, the same polite conversations, The same feeling that she had somehow become a person who just maintained things. A house, a schedule, a face people expected. Nothing terrible. That was almost worse. I got too good at getting through days, she said. That's all. I didn't have some wise answer ready. I just said, "You don't seem half asleep with me." Rachel looked at me for a long second, and then she leaned in and kissed me. It was not rushed. That was the thing I remember most. After all that movement, all those miles, all the dumb little disasters, it happened in a way that felt almost calm. Like we were both finally stopping pretending we hadn't been heading there. After that, the room got even quieter. The rain outside, the weak air conditioner, her hand on my shoulder, my mouth dry for no reason. Nothing about it felt like a fling or some reckless road game. It felt like something we had already built without naming. In the morning, we were short on money in a way that stopped being funny. I sat at the little table by the window with receipts, fuel costs, motel charge, and the cash I had left, doing bad math twice because I didn't like the first answer. Rachel came out of the bathroom toweling her hair and took one look at my face. "That bad? We need to be smarter," I said. "A lot smarter." She crossed the room and sat beside me. "No panic. No blame. Just show me." So I did. We cut out anything extra. Cheap food, fewer paid stops, no more lazy detours unless we had to. I hated admitting I'd misjudged it. Months fixing the van, planning the route, thinking I had enough. Rachel listened, then slid some cash from her bag onto the table. I looked at it. "No. Yes. I invited you. And I came," she said. "This is both of us now." I started to argue again, but she put her hand over mine and held it there. "Luke, stop trying to carry the whole thing alone. That should have embarrassed me. Instead, it did something worse. It made me want a future I had no right to start picturing yet. Not just the trip. Not just another night. Something after." We still got snippy later that day when the van made a new rattling sound and I pulled over too hard onto gravel. I told her not to worry. She told me that saying not to worry was not the same as having a plan. I said I did have a plan. She said my plan seemed to be staring at the engine until it respected me. 5 minutes later, we were both laughing again because she wasn't wrong. That was when I understood this wasn't just chemistry built on nice views and being far from home. Trouble kept showing up, and every time it did, we moved toward the problem together. No drama. No keeping score. Just both hands on the same mess. That night, parked under a washed-out sky with the doors open to cool air, Rachel rested her head against my shoulder and said, "I'm starting to hate the idea of this ending." I didn't answer right away because the truth felt too big. Then I said, "Yeah, me too." And for the rest of that evening, with the road stretching ahead of us and home still far enough away to ignore, the van didn't feel like a vehicle anymore. It felt like a life we had somehow slipped into by accident, and neither of us wanted to be the first one to call it temporary. The last stretch home was the hardest part of the whole trip, which felt unfair after everything else. By then, the road had trained us into a rhythm I didn't have to think about. Rachel handed me coffee before I asked for it. I checked the van at every fuel stop without being told. We packed faster, cleaned up faster, argued less, and somehow knew when the other one needed quiet. It should have made the drive back easy. Instead, it made every mile feel expensive. Because now we both knew what was waiting at the end of it. Not some dramatic disaster. Just normal life. Her porch. My driveway. The same street where this had started as a joke. The van started acting up again about 2 hours from home. Nothing huge at first. A rough pull. Then a shudder. Then a sound from underneath that made my stomach drop. I eased us onto the shoulder and shut it down before it could turn into something worse. Rachel looked out the windshield for a second, then leaned back in her seat. "Of course." I laughed once. "Yeah, of course." We climbed out into hot wind and truck noise, and I slid halfway under the van on the thin mat I kept in the back. Dust in my face, metal ticking as it cooled, my shirt sticking to my back. Rachel crouched nearby, passing me tools, holding the flashlight, asking short questions when I needed them and staying quiet when I didn't. It turned out to be something loose in the bracket and a belt that had shifted just enough to make trouble without fully giving out. Not the worst thing. Still bad enough to eat up time and patience. My hands were black with grime by the time I got back out. Rachel stood and handed me the water bottle. "You look awful." "Thank you." "You're welcome." I drank half of it in one go. Then I looked at the van, then at the road ahead, and finally at her. "We can still make it." She nodded, but she wasn't looking at the van. She was looking at me with that same steady expression she'd had in the motel room when both of us stopped pretending. We got back on the road near sunset. Neither of us talked much after that. Not because it was bad between us. More because it wasn't simple anymore. Home was getting closer by the minute, and the question we'd managed to keep just ahead of us was finally sitting right there between the seats. Was this only real because we were moving? When we turned onto our street, it hit me harder than I expected. Her house first on the right, mine just after. Same lawns, same mailboxes, same quiet neighborhood that had felt so small the morning I left. I parked in front of my place and cut the engine. The silence after that long drive felt almost wrong. Rachel didn't open the door. Neither did I. I looked at my hands on the wheel and said, "So I guess this is the part where everything goes back to normal." The second I said it, I hated it. Rachel was quiet long enough that I finally turned toward her. She had one hand resting on her bag, but she hadn't picked it up. Then she said, "I don't want normal." I didn't answer because I honestly wasn't sure I'd heard her right. She let out a breath and looked past me, out through the windshield at both houses. "I mean it. I do not want to go back inside, unpack, and pretend this was just some wild thing I did for a couple weeks before returning to my scheduled life." My pulse was so loud it felt stupid. "Rachel." "No, let me say it right," she said. And now there was a little shake in her voice. Not much, just enough to make it real. "I left because I was tired of feeling dead in my own life. And somewhere on this trip, with all the mess and the bad weather and the breakdowns and the cheap food and you cursing at this van like it was a person, I started feeling like myself again." She looked at me then. Straight at me. Not the version that manages things. Me. I couldn't think of one smart response. All I had was the truth. "Then stay." Came out rougher than I meant it to. Rachel held my gaze another second, then gave the small disbelieving laugh, like she'd been waiting the whole drive for one clear reason not to step back into the old pattern. She reached down, took her duffel from the floor, and instead of opening her door, she shoved it behind my seat. Just like that. No big speech. No dragged-out doubt. Just a choice. I stared at the bag, then at her. "That's it." She smiled. "That's it. Would you have the guts to leave your old life behind? Let's talk in the comments." "You're really not going home?" She glanced toward her house, then back at me. "I am home.